Hello, everyone. I am Kayte Nunn, the author of 5 novels now, which is something of a surprise to me. And I'm here with Dymocks Chapter 1 to talk mostly about my latest novel, The Silk House, which was published a couple of weeks ago. And I'm delighted for those of you who can join me. Here it's a very rainy, dark evening, so hopefully it's better where you are. I thought I would start off with the question that I get asked most often, which is, where do your ideas come from? And before I started writing, I wondered this too. I had wanted to write for a long, long time, but could never think of any kind of idea that might be worth writing a story about. And really, it wasn't until I made myself focus on it and kind of tuned into things that I realized actually ideas are everywhere, and it's a case of sifting through them to test them out to see if they might make the basis for a story. And so for The Silk House, it wasn't one single idea. It really was a confluence of a number of different things. But the first of which, and I think Sam's got a photo that she can put up, was a painting that I saw. Hello, everybody. I saw in the Art Galleries New South Wales during the Archibald exhibition of 2016. So it was about 4 years ago. And it's by Heidi Yardley, and it's called Birth, Death, Portrait of Nell. And it's actually, I love the fact that it's a portrait of an artist by an artist. Nell is a performance artist, and this was her costume for one of her pieces, I think called Labyrinth. And it struck me immediately the minute I set eyes on it. And I did some more reading recently, and Heidi Yardley, the artist, said that she found Nell to be a powerful woman who was unafraid of her destiny, and that was what she was attempting to convey in this painting. And it really struck me, and I thought, there's an interesting idea for a character. And so I took a photograph and printed it out, actually, and pasted it in a writing notebook, and then promptly forgot about it. And then about a year or so later, I was visiting my hometown in England, and my father's wife at the time told me that house in the high street that I had known really just as another shop. I think it was even like a W.H. Smith, a bookshop, ironically. And she told me that it had been recently restored, and that, in actual fact, it had been built originally as a house for a silk merchant, a prosperous silk merchant in the town in the 18th century. And so I went and had a look around, and I love that kind of anything historic, and just found it absolutely fascinating. And then a week or so later, I was in London, and I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum. And oh, hello, everybody. It's nice to see your messages. I'm glad there's somebody there, lots of people there. I went to the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I came across, there's a costume department there, which is just one of my absolute favorite places to go. I've been many, many times and always find something new to look at. And I came across a quite astonishing silk gown, and I think we've got another picture of it. Oh, fantastic. And this was actually woven in the 18th century, and honestly, it looks like it could have been made yesterday. It's in incredible condition. And I looked at the caption and discovered that the pattern was designed by a woman called Anna Maria Garthwaite. And I did some research when I started to think about what I might write next, and discovered that she had been a very prolific silk designer living in Spitalfields, which was the heart of the industry in London in that time. And she was one of really a very, very few women. Most of the pattern designers were men. And so the combination of having explored this old silk merchant's house and then found this pattern woven by a woman really started to kind of just whir away in the back of my mind. And actually, and now I think we've also got a photo of this merchant's house in the town that I grew up in. Sam, if you've got that one. And I think when I described it, there we are. I remembered the shape of the roof, and it does look like a kind of sawtooth roof, and the way the windows are. So I was able to really use that in my story as well, and definitely base it on that. And then I knew also that I would quite fancied writing a ghost story. I'd always loved that feeling of reading a book late at night that's a little bit creepy, and you suddenly start to hear noises, or you're looking over your shoulder as you're reading. And so I did a little bit more research, and I actually found out that this house, the merchant's house, was rumored to have been haunted. It was apartments above the shop years ago, and that I found something online that told me that people had it investigated for paranormal activity. And so again, that was another thread that then I added to my story. And then also when I was at home in this town, I went right up the tower of one of the churches there, and I think we've got a photo that's just taken. Yes, there's the view from the tower. I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's this big, long, wide high street. It's one of the widest high streets in England, I think one of three. And it was made so wide that you could turn a carriage and six around in the middle of the high street. And this town was a popular stopping point on the road from London to Bath during that time. And once the railways went in, though, the town kind of faltered a bit. And so there was a school that was founded. And it was when I was standing at the top of this tower looking down, and my father's wife, who was with me, pointed out, and she said, "There, you can see into the master's garden." And that again just set something off in my mind, and I thought, oh, that's kind of quite interesting, and having the school there and then this house and a bit of a ghostly connection. And so I really started to just mull it over and make some notes to myself. And then also, one of my favorite places to go in this town, there's a river that runs not. Hello, I hope everybody can hear me again now. I'm so sorry about that. I don't know quite what happened, but I'm back, and maybe it was a ghost messing things up. So I will try and get back to where I was, which was talking about the merchant's house, I think, and how that was the inspiration, part of the inspiration for the story. And one of the other places in the town is the river, and various things happen in the river in both places. In both timelines. I hope. Am I back? Yes. And the various characters go down to the river. Oh, good, I'm back. Thank you, and thank you for your patience and hanging in there. I do apologize about that. And so I thought, so I've told you a little bit about the inspiration behind some of the ideas for that story. And now I can tell you just a little bit about what it's about. It is basically set in two timelines, and I do enjoy writing books like that. I love to solve a mystery in the past, in the present day. I write each strand separately, so that I really have a full story in each, and can concentrate and keep my head in one time period at a time. And so for the Silk House in the 1700s, late 1700s, a young maid called Rowan Caswell goes to work in the home of a silk merchant. And she goes to a hiring fair, and this fair called Mop Fair still exists in the town I grew up in today, although it's much more of a carnival now than a hiring fair. But in those days, I think twice a year in the autumn, people would come from villages all around, and they would bring the tools of their trade. So if they were a shepherd, they would bring a crook. If they were a housemaid, they would bring a mop. And they would wait to be hired. And then once they were hired, they were given a little piece of blue ribbon that was attached to their dress or their waistcoat or whatever they were wearing, their jacket. And so this maid goes to work in the house, but she has a talent for healing and for herbs, and which is pretty soon discovered by the inhabitants of the house and the townspeople. But in those days, it's not long since only several generations since the laws against witchcraft had been repealed. And really still there was a lot of superstition about women with unusual powers, and just, you didn't want to be accused of anything untoward, and particularly witchcraft. You could still be run out of town. And so she has to be quite careful in the way she conducts herself. And then in the contemporary strand, a young Australian history teacher goes to work at a British boarding school that is just about to admit girls for the first time. And it happens to be in a house called Silk House, which was the house that the silk merchant originally built in the 18th century. And pretty much as soon as Thea arrives, strange things start happening. And she begins to wonder what could be going on, and starts to doubt herself slightly as well. And that's really where the story goes from there. I'm happy to take some questions now, anything at all. And any about the book or previous books, or anything you might have about writing and my process. Somebody actually the other day, my girlfriends asked me how I choose the names for my characters, and in the Silk House particularly, I was quite deliberate about the choice of characters. So Rowan is named after a tree that has quite strong medicinal powers, then three of the girls in the house have names that are often associated with the witchcraft: Aradia, Sabrina, as you would know from Sabrina the Witch, and various other things. Quick question there from Sue. Thank you. What comes first, the research or the story? Probably the research. Before I start writing, thank you. I do several months just reading around the subject, trying to imagine what life would be like in the time I've decided to write in. And it's often as a result of that reading that ideas jump out at me. And I start to formulate a story, and I start to imagine my characters. And often for me, and writers write in very different ways, and there's no wrong or right way. For me, the characters and the location, the sense of place come first. And I suppose I try and write to find out what's happened to them, really, or what might be about to happen as well. Yes. Tracy, thank you, Tracy. When writing the book, did you write each of the two timelines? Did I write each separately? Yes, I did. When I first started writing historical fiction, which was with The Botanist's Daughter, I had begun to write them in parallel and was just finding myself that I was getting stuck. And so I asked, over Twitter actually, a writer I really admire, Kate Forsyth, what her advice was, because I knew she had written several dual timeline novels, and she said, oh yes, definitely, if you can, write each one separately and keep your head in the same space. And so I did that, and I've done that ever since. And once I've written the two timelines, I then begin the process of literally weaving them together. And it's for the last two books, actually, it's happened pretty easily. It's fitted together quite well. There's been a little bit of adjustment and making sure that I don't give away in the present what I haven't yet explained in the past. But apart from that, that's what seems to work well for me. So yes, thank you, Tracy. It's a good question. Has anybody else got any other questions? Oh, Lou. Hello, Lou. Did you integrate the elements to build tension after you had written a first draft, or as you were going? Definitely as I was going. I think I wanted to have all those little things that some people associate with somewhere being disturbed. So infestations, there's an infestation of moths, there are strange noises, unearthly screams. But what I also wanted to do was have them be things that could actually really be easily explained away as just, well, we've got some bugs in the house, or, we've got a moth problem, or, it's the cat screeching at something outside. But yes, I knew that I wanted to just keep slowly, without overdoing it, because I think you can overdo it, just slowly ratchet up the tension with all, particularly for Thea, with all those things that were happening to her. So yes, thanks, Leo. I hope that answers your question. And anybody else? Oh, Mercedes. Hello, Mercedes. That's a friend of mine. There was a lovely twist at the end. Did you plan this out at the start, or did it come to you all of a sudden? That was actually something I wish I was a really, really good planner, but I'm not. I try and at least have an idea of where the story's going before I start. But this twist at the end took me by surprise. And as I was writing it, I realized what it was. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. I had to go back and reverse engineer a few things to make it logical. But that was as delightful a surprise to me as I hope it will be to the reader. So yes, thanks, Mercedes. Keisha, have I pronounced that right? I hope so, Keisha. Which do you enjoy writing about the most, the past or the present? Oh, that's very difficult. Usually when I'm writing the past strand, I think, oh, the present one's going to be so much easier. I can't wait to get to that. And then when I'm writing the other strand, I'm like, no, the other one was much easier. So I don't know. I like both. I do like writing contemporary storylines and having contemporary characters with a contemporary sensibility, definitely. So it's nice to be able to include that in books that are essentially historical fiction as well. So yes, I don't have a favorite. Sancha, hello, Sancha. Do you believe in ghosts? I am very suggestible. I also, a few years ago, went on a ghost tour of the quarantine station in Manly. And this was another thing that kind of fed into the story. I'm a firm believer that places can still carry some of the events that might have happened there, some of the emotions, some of the resonance there. And I really found this at the quarantine station. It was a midnight ghost tour. And we walked into some of the buildings there, and I just felt so uncomfortable, as if something really horrible had happened, and had to just leave them. So if that's, I guess I don't believe in the ghost that kind of sits on the end of your bed, but I do believe in a presence, definitely a historical presence. Yes. Franca, does the term historical fiction annoy you? Does it narrow your potential audience? I've never thought it annoys me. No, not at all. And does it narrow my audience? I'm really not sure. I would hope most people would look at read the blurb, as my daughter always says, read the blurb, Mum, on the back of the jacket and make up their mind then. Obviously, the package of a book will give a person an idea of what it might be about. But I think there are enough lovers of historical fiction that I don't think it's going to put people off. And sometimes you need to actually signpost and point people and give them an idea of what a book is about, and to be able to categorize it. So yes, I'm trying to write more mysteries. So within that category of historical fiction, I definitely like to write a mystery within that. Yes. Sharon, can you read novels while writing? Apart from the wonderful Kate Forsyth, who are some of your favorite historical fiction authors? Oh, thank you, Sharon. Yes, I read a lot. I do read a lot when I'm writing. I read for research, and then I read for pleasure, and I read quite widely. I do love reading crime. I love contemporary, really snarky fiction. Things like Where'd You Go, Bernadette? I'm looking forward to the movie of that. I think it will be very good, by Maria Semple. And some of my other favorite historical fiction authors. I recently finished Lauren Chater's Gulliver's Wife and thoroughly enjoyed that. I also read Natasha Lester's The Paris Secret, and that was just a delight to escape into those pages. I have Maggie O'Farrell's Hamnet still sitting on my bedside table, which has been there for about 6 weeks, unfortunately. Other things have taken precedence. So I'm a big fan of hers, and I think that will be interesting to read her take on historical fiction there. So I hope that answers your question. Pauline, do I travel between countries very often? Not often enough, sadly, and certainly not at the moment. I was fortunate that I had been to the UK about 3 years ago when I was researching, finishing off researching The Botanist's Daughter, doing some research for The Forgotten Letters of Esther Durrant, and I went to the Isles of Scilly specifically for that because that was where it's set. I hadn't been there. And then the Silk House is based on a town I grew up in, so I knew it fairly well, and I had also visited Spitalfields before too. Yes, so no, I wish I could travel more, and sometimes I think, why can't I set a book in France or Italy or, you know, the Greek islands and then have an excuse to travel there? So maybe in the future I'll endeavour to do that. Timothy, hello Timothy. What advice would you give to budding writers who don't know how to begin? That's a very good question, because for a long time I didn't know how to begin. I think just start making notes to yourself. Keep a notebook, keep it by your bed. Write snippets of things down and snippets of ideas. They might not go anywhere, but it'll start your brain kind of tuning in to thinking in a fictional sense, I suppose. That would be one thing I would do. And it's not something, I mean, I had worked as a writer for years, but I didn't know how to write fiction. Even when I started writing fiction, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so I did a number of short courses. Often when there was a writers' festival, there would be workshops, and I read online. I did a lot of research. I often, if I want to know something about anything, I just research the hell out of it as much as I can. I want all the information I can find. So research, there are a couple of really good books on craft, one of which in particular I would recommend is called, it's by Donald Maas, and it's Writing 21st Century Fiction. There's an awful lot of information in there. But I found that an invaluable resource. I think also as a beginner, there's a fantastic book called Bird by Bird that will really encourage you to start writing and start thinking creatively. Yes, well, I'm getting lots of questions. Shirley, what were the most fascinating things you learned while researching herbal lore and paranormal activity? Oh, good question, Shirley. Herbal lore, it's just the number of plants, I suppose, that are poisonous. That was quite something for me to find out. And I loved just the names of them and being able to include them and descriptions of them in the book. And then what did I find out that was fascinating about paranormal activity? It was more about witchcraft, really, that I researched. And I was really quite astonished to discover the number of people, particularly women, old women, who'd been accused of witchcraft in Wiltshire, which is the county I grew up in. And there were a number of them, and I include a couple of their names in the story. And one particular incident that struck me as quite horrific, which was a story of 4 Danish sisters called the Hansel sisters, who were obviously foreign and new to the area. And when an illness struck the area, they were thought to have brought it with them. And so they were taken and beaten to death in a forest, and left there and buried there. And they were buried quite far apart so that they couldn't join together again, even in death. And now the story is, and you can go and see these trees, there are 4 beech trees that are at sort of a distance from each other that are said to be where the Hansel sisters were buried. So that was quite an interesting thing to discover. Yes. Hello, Paige. Did you always want to be a writer? I did. I really did. But I thought other people who are much cleverer than me were writers. I couldn't see a way of ever, particularly writing fiction. I remember at my aunt actually tells me that even when I was 8, I was writing short stories, and I wrote dreadful poetry and kept diaries when I was a teenager. And I remember having a careers interview at school when I was 17 or 18, about to leave school, and they asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to be a journalist. And they were like, "Oh no, nice girls aren't journalists. How about you go and do something like occupational therapy?" Which was quite astonishing, really. So yes, I did always want to be a writer, and so I worked in publishing to start with, and then, ironically, in pursuit of more writing opportunities, moved to magazines, where I became a feature writer, and it went from there. But I first started writing fiction probably about 7 years ago, and a friend of mine told me that she'd written a book and she'd gotten a book deal. And I was quite devastated. I was happy for her, but I was also like, no, that was my dream. But it gave me permission. I thought, well, if she can do it, why not? And it's now or never. And I was freelancing at the time, and I had a small baby, but she was in daycare a couple of days a week. So I had that time. I had some time between freelance jobs, and I just sat down and began writing a story and telling myself a story. And I had no idea if it's any good or not. And I really didn't know what I didn't know. But what I did really love was the feeling of having written at the end of every day, to have added something to a story. It was incredibly satisfying, and still is. It's the thing that keeps me going, definitely. Lee, what was your favorite book or book series growing up? When I was very young, I loved Anne of Green Gables, and I still sob when I reread it and Matthew dies. So that was definitely my favorite book. And then when I was a teenager, I was a bit depressed for a while, and it was all a bit grim, and I was reading a lot of very dark Russian books. And then I discovered Jilly Cooper, and I just absolutely loved it. And I would stay up all night reading her books. When they first came out, I'd rush to the bookstore and buy it, and literally stay up, reading 800 pages until my eyes were on stalks. And I was at boarding school, and they were really my comfort, those books, definitely. So yes, I have a very fond spot in my heart for her. Chris, hello, Chris. Where do you write best? A hidden corner of your home, a comfortable nook in your favorite coffee shop? Both, actually. I do have a studio now set up with a big screen and a proper chair, and that is much better for my posture and for occasional headaches I get. But I often will just sit on the couch, or I'll sit, at the moment it's winter and our little weatherboard cottage is really cold. So I sit in the sunshine and try and warm up and write on a sofa. But I'm easily bored as well. So sometimes I'll just feel like getting out of the house if I've been home writing, for days on end, and go to a coffee shop. And often I'll get, a lot done there in an hour and a half it might take me a whole day at home. So I like to mix it up. Yeah. Some more. Oh, thank you, Kayte. Yes, I love Riders too. That is my absolute favorite Jilly Cooper book. Yes. We have some more questions. Oh, Vicky, what a great question. I just saw this one. How did you get your first novel published? It was a process. I spent about a year writing the novel, and doing some revisions on it. And then I started to send it out. And I researched agents in the UK and in Australia, and I sent it out to a number of them and got quite a few rejections. I got a few requests for the full manuscript, but then, not going nowhere. And then one day, my current agent rang me and she said, I really like it. But you've got to change this and change that and change that and change the protagonist. And she spent about 45 minutes on the phone with me as I was frantically taking notes. And she said, well, you don't seem too fazed by that. So, do all that and come back to me and we'll see how we go. And so I did. I came back to her and she liked the changes I'd made. And she started a process of submissions. But again, we got quite a few rejections. And it took nearly a year before a publisher accepted it. So it certainly wasn't an easy process. And somebody once said to me, oh, I suppose you had connections because you worked in journalism and you'd worked in book publishing. And not really. I didn't have any connections in publishing. So I was literally just speculatively writing off and approaching people. But it did eventually happen. So it's a marathon. It's definitely a marathon. You've got to really be in it for the long haul, I think, if you're pursuing, wanting to pursue a writing career. Yes. Anybody else? Some more questions? Oh, thank you for your comments, everybody. That's lovely. Have we got some more questions? Oh, Debbie Wassel, are you writing anything at present? Well, I am. Because I'm aiming to produce a book a year, I'm often working on 3 books over the course of a year. So while I'm talking about the Silk House, I've just finished a structural edit on a book that I hope will be published next year. Well, Hachette, my publisher, has bought it, so I'm hoping it will come out. That is another dual timeline and a bit of a mystery set in Burma during the Second World War, which I'm really quite excited about it because it's a very little known area where women, Australian and English women, served the closest to the front line of any women's service in the war. So I'm really excited by that. And then I'm just starting to think about and research a book for the following year. But I can't really say too much about that at the moment because it might well change. So. Oh, last question. Where is my next book set? Oh, thank you, Bettina. I think I just said, actually, it's set in Burma, and then it's also set in Ireland in 1999, just outside Galway in a castle on the eve of the millennium, so New Year's Eve 1999, as well as Burma. So it's a dual timeline as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for all your questions and for coming along. And I do apologize about the technical difficulties. That's never happened before. But I'm glad we got through it. And thank you for hanging in there.